Welcome to Asian Agribiz podcasts. I am Hatu. Today we explore the growing trend of crate-free gestation in pig farming. This is a practice that is gaining momentum globally, but would it be feasible in Southeast Asia where most gestating sows remain confined in crates? Isa Tan talks to Nigel Godde of Big Dutchman Asia to learn more about the development of crate-free gestation and its potential adoption in the region.
Hello, Nigel. Thank you for joining us for today's podcast. Before we get started, can you just tell me a little briefly something about yourself?
Yes, my name's firstly, good morning, Isa. My name's Nigel Godde. I'm the Director of Sales for the business unit PIG for Asia, Big Dutchman. So we cover the region all the way up to Korea, Japan, of course, Southeast Asia, and also down as far as Australia. So I've been with Big Dutchman around 12 years, 6 years based in Beijing, looking after China, and the last 6 years looking after Asia, as I mentioned earlier.
Well, thank you. Today, I would like to talk to you about crate-free production
hmm
and how this is impacting or how this could affect the pig sector in Southeast Asia.
hmm
So let me start with the first question. How does crate-free production for gestation impact the welfare and behavior of pigs compared to the traditional systems that are currently being used?
Yes, well, I guess when we say crate free, we're referring to group housing, where for many, many years with gestation stalls, where basically the sow can only stand up, lie down. It's interesting that from a Big Dutchman perspective, we've been exposed to group housing for over 30 years because it's in Europe. It wasn't actually originally animal welfare that drove the change to group housing or gestation stall free. It was actually how can we make the sow more healthy when she returns to the mating barn? So they started to recognize, especially sows as they got a little older, that they didn't have the same muscle formation and they weren't as healthy because literally they couldn't move for 3 months. So
Mm.
because they're only standing up, lying down. And while that made it easier to manage each sow, the animal's health was not possibly as good. So what they started to experiment with was group housing. And what they found is that the sow's able to walk around, you're not getting as much lameness, etc. So in short, they're returning to the mating barn in better condition. So that was the initial focus of it. And then the animal welfare sector, etc., picked up on this and said, well, actually, this is the way we should go. It makes sense because the animal, the sow, can have much more natural movements, natural habits, etc. But we still have very good production results. Now,
Mm.
the same as in that system, it requires a higher level of management. So we get back to which is better. In the first instance, you could argue that group housing is better for the animal's health and all the things I mentioned earlier, but it does require a higher level of management. Yeah. So, for example, in Australia, we've been highly successful converting, all of our customers down here, and all new barns are 100% group housing. And so there's been, you know, um, 10 to 8 years of that management practices. In
Mm.
Southeast Asia, the limitations being the amount of people exposed to group housing and the management that goes with that. Now, that's not to say it's not trainable. It's very trainable, yeah. But when you're, big companies or even smaller companies as well, you do have to have key people in your organization that understand the group housing concept. What you can do with group housing, depending on the type that you utilize, there can actually be a more positive result because you can get even more information. Now, how do we do that? In that, for example, group housing where you involve electronic sow feeding, each sow has an electronic tag. So every time she eats, it's been recorded. Yeah.
Mm.
And we know, and the feed's been weighed, so we know exactly how much feed she's eating on a daily basis. In a gestation stall, yes, we might have volumetric manual dispensers where we say, okay, they get this many kilograms a day, but it tends to go into a common trough with water added and things like that. And it also requires that the operator or the farm staff walk along and note that that sow has not eaten today. It may be
Mhm.
ill for some reason or whatever, but if they don't record that manually on the sheet, and then later that's recorded in their sow management system, it's lost. Whereas with electronic sow feeding, that's recorded automatically into the system, and the farm manager or whoever, even the farm owner, can log in remotely and check, oh, hey, how come this sow hasn't eaten today? Yes, we've noted that. We're going to keep an eye on that sow. And if it's 2 days in a row, we're going to make sure that we go out and isolate her and move her to a sick pen or something. Yeah. So getting back, comparing, as you said, there's obviously fors and against.
Mhm.
The other one is, which is the big one, is the capital cost. When you initially make, because if you picture, of course, a stall might be only 2.2, 2.3 meters long, only 650 millimeters wide. Yeah.
Okay.
And you've got them stacked along row after row. Whereas in group housing, normally you would have for each sow around 2.1, 2.2 square meters per sow. So straight away, your capital cost is higher because your building has to be bigger. And obviously, civil work building is a big factor in the initial capital cost. Now, in regards to the actual equipment, it's actually got pretty even because with gestation stalls, you picture how much steel is utilized to have those rows and rows and rows of gestation
Yeah.
stalls. Whereas in a electronic sow feeding system, for example, you actually have more like a large pen, and then the cost is more so on that individual electronic sow feeding unit, what we call, for example, the Corematic 3, where the sow
Mhm.
walks in to like a tunnel arrangement. The antenna senses and says, "Oh, yes, you're sow number 123. You haven't eaten today. Here's your ration, your exact amount you should eat for your stage of gestation." She eats, it lets it out, it closes the trough and says, "Okay, time to leave." Opens the front gate. The next one comes in.
Okay.
So, so from a cost perspective in equipment, it's actually getting pretty similar. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Does it necessarily mean that if you go group housing, you will need to have an electronic style feeding? Is it something that must go together?
No, that's not necessarily the case. There's electronic sow feeding in the first instance where you have two ways to do that. The one I just explained, where they walk into a unit and walk out the other side after they've eaten, and then you have other ones which are more where they walk in. It's a little bit like a self-catching um, sow crate where they walk in, that the crate closes behind them, they eat, they walk backwards, the crate opens up, and they back out, and the next one comes in. Both of those have the benefit that you're utilizing an ear tag with the antenna and controlling the daily feeding ration. And so you have traceability of every sow. However,
Mhm.
there's also group housing where you may group in smaller pens, say 12 to 13, let's say, sows together. They've still got 2.1, 2.2 meters per sow each. But where they eat is if you just picture a small the front of the gestation stall today, if you just picture a quarter of each one of those, so there's 13 in a row and 12 to 13, and the feed is dropped all at the same time, and there is a feeding space for every sow, but there's always a more dominant sow or dominant sows, and they may make sure that they're there first. They eat their share first. They may go down the road to the smaller sow, push her out of the road, and actually eat part of her portion. What's the benefit of that group housing? The benefit of that group housing takes less management. Yeah, there's no software involved. There's no electric involved. It's just got the same volumetric dispensers as you would use in a standard gestation house. So from a management perspective, quarter stalls, if you wanted to call them that, like head stalls is another way to describe it. That could be a way of doing it as well. In short, group housing, there's options. Yeah.
Okay. All right. With the climate and the environmental conditions here, what would the adaptation or modification that has to be done on that end?
It's actually a pretty good point. It's in some ways it's beneficial because if you once again picture a current gestation or a traditional gestation house where all the sows are very much condensed into the together in smaller areas, even though the house is large, but you have a large amount of sows basically shoulder to shoulder. And if you think of Southeast Asia, of course, tunnel ventilation is the norm. Yeah, so you're actually got cool pads at one end, you've got fans at the other, and you're pulling that cold air. Hopefully, in Southeast Asia, you have the issue because the air is so humid that the cool pads are, that the efficiency is not as high as other areas because the air is already quite damp. But if you picture how many sows are banked up there shoulder to shoulder, that is one of the biggest challenges in gestation. You have big sows generating a lot of heat and you're trying to pull down and you're trying to cool that whole building evenly. But actually, from one end of the building to the other, you're generating heat the whole way through. So the coolness from one end to the other end is normally a little different. Yeah, it increases a few degrees. Yeah, and if you go too long, over 90 meters, over 100 meters, you'll get even worse effect on this. So that's with gestation stalls. If we look when we say group housing, you've actually got you've got more area. So you could argue, okay, you have to have a little bit more air exchange, etc., because the area is bigger. This is true. However, the sows are not packed in and they can actually move around. And what the sows will do, they'll go find and lie where they're comfortable. If they find an area, where they're not getting as much airflow, etc., they'll actually move around and go, oh, this area is quite comfortable. So if you go into a group housing environment, there is less noise. The sows are more comfortable. You find them almost laying together in certain areas. They'll, because sows are quite smart. They go, that's the area I eat. This is the area I drink. This is the area I defecate. And this is the area I lay and sleep. Yeah. And they'll keep that area quite clean. So getting back to the point about climate, they're actually, because they have the ability to move around and they're not shoulder to shoulder all the time with other sows, the climate system actually works a lot more effective. Yeah, so really the traditional tunnel is perfect. It still works exactly the same. So in short, the climate system that you utilize or the ventilation system that you utilize is basically the same, and you could argue that it would work better than a stall. Yeah.
Okay. How much would the increase in cost possibly be if you're shifting from what you traditionally have a crate system and then you decide to move into group style housing?
Well, I guess that there's two ways to, there's one when you're doing where you're doing a greenfield site, so a new farm. Yeah. Obviously, that's the most ideal. For group housing and gestation, you're going to need about, well, I'm just trying to think, you're probably going to need about 50 to 60% more space. I'm just trying to do the math because you have each stall, but then you also in a traditional house, you've still got alleyways, etc. So it'd probably be you need for gestation maybe 60% or more space. So for your gestation, your building costs and your civil cost are going to be I couldn't put an exact number on it, but so the
Mm-hmm.
percentage terms, you're going to maybe 20 to 30% increase your building costs across the sow farm.
Okay.
What's the return on investment if we look at it that way? You could, for example, if you use electronic sow feeding system, you're doing exacting feeding, and you may actually be able to reduce feed waste. So you're getting a return on investment there.
Yeah.
As we started off the conversation, is group housing started way back when 30 years ago in Europe, where they're actually looking at ways to improve the gestating sow's health, so that then after after she went to farrowing and returned to the mating barn, that she was in a better condition, or first of all she was arriving at the farrowing barn in a healthier condition, and then what goes to subsequently goes back to the mating barn. So what's your return on investment there? Potentially there might be a lower mortality. You might have healthier sows, so therefore, you know, I'm sure breeding companies potentially could have the numbers where they would say, well, you know, in places in Europe, etc., they're getting 40 PSY compared to Southeast Asia, 30 or something like that. Now, is that totally based on group housing? No, there's a number of factors in there. But the point is, there may be a return on investment for sure. If it's
Mm-hmm.
managed well, you're going to get healthier sows and better production. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So even though there is a higher upfront capital cost, the returns on investment are there. And also, I think one point we should make is it's going to future-proof your operation, because for sure this is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now in Europe it's already happened, in Australia it's already happened, but in Asia, parts of Asia, we see it, not the whole countries, but it might be, for example, I've got a contract to supply McDonald's with pork, or Jollibee or something like that. And they say from 2025, we're going to go completely gestation stall free, or all group housing. If you don't have group housing, you either don't supply them or you have to make alterations. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of long term thinking, isn't there, or future proofing your business, because for sure it's happening. You know,
Mm-hmm.
of course, in Asia, Southeast Asia, it's not going to happen as quickly. This is obvious, yeah, because the general population, they want to know that they can get good, healthy, cost-effective pork. If it was brought up in a gestation store or group housing, that's not really going to make a difference to the housewife going to the market and how much she pays for the pork. So it doesn't enter her. But there's a growing middle class across all parts of Asia that is, you know, more conscious of animal welfare, these sorts of things, where they're going to start demanding that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So getting back, future proofing your business. Do we need to do it for all of Asia today? No, we don't. But there's getting more and more of a demand, and there's a lot of large companies, pig producers in Asia, that also export pork all across the world. If you export pork to Europe, that pork has to be grown under the same regulations basically as Europe.
Yeah.
So if
Mm-hmm.
you've just got gestation stalls, you cannot, and certainly within a year's time, you will not be able to export. We do have capabilities just on that. If people have, they've already got barns that are 5, 10 years old, we do have systems where we can retrofit. Yeah.
Yeah.
It just means in that one gestation barn, you won't be able to fit as many sows, of course, because the big issue with barns is the civil work, the floor. If you picture the manure channels, things like that,
Mm-hmm.
if you have to rip all this up and start again, that is a huge headache. So we have options where we can do retrofitting of, it's all stalls. You remove the stalls. You don't have to upset the flooring. All you need to do is reset the panning. You can even utilize the same feed line. And then you can use like the callback system. As I said earlier, they walk in, they eat, and then they just walk out gently backwards, and the next sow walks in. So each unit will feed, say, 20 sows. So you might have two or three. You have 3 units together, which feeds 50 to 60 sows. And you, instead of having 60 crates, you have a pen which holds 60 sows, for example.
Okay. After ASF, the region there has been, like particularly in Vietnam, you're hearing about big companies that are building new farms. Have you noticed if these bigger companies have switched the group housing system?
I would say not all, and even the ones that are doing it are not doing all of their farms. If we
Okay.
look at CP, they've made statements to say they're going to go 100% group housing by the end of 2025, I believe. So it depends on the market, I believe. In short, the answer is no, because of the speed of which farms are being built. I get back to the original point. What's the difference? What's the negative? The negative, of course, initially is that capital cost, but there is a return on investment. But two is the management. Yeah,
Mm,
it does
mm,
require a higher degree, a higher understanding of pig management for sure. So some producers are worried about that. If they're making 10 farms in 1 year, are they going to be able to get enough skilled staff? But that is across the board, whether it's group housing or even just standard farms. There is a real issue, as it always is when the industry grows so quickly, is finding good quality staff and skilled staff. Yeah, so that'll be a challenge regardless. So
okay.
if you're going to look at, for example, Australia, that's 100%. You know, Japan, Korea, that's probably 50%. Vietnam, it might be as low as like 5% new farms are group housing. Philippines, it's
Okay.
starting to change. Yeah, we have some very good customers there that have really made the commitment because I mentioned future proofing. They're going for the future. We believe this will be demanded by our customer base. So they're
Mhm.
focusing on that. Where others, well, I'm not sure when that change will come. I'm going to go traditional, and both is fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's how quickly the pace of change is coming
Mhm.
in your country, in your area, and which market do you service? Because if you wish to service any sort of the European market, etc., you have to go this way.
Go.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in answer to your question, one other thing, I don't think that this will be a government-led thing. I think that group housing will be consumer-driven or food company-driven, where, as I mentioned before, whether it's McDonald's or Jollibee or whatever, will say, just like they do on the chicken or the egg side, this must be, in this case, a gestation store free or group housing. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. With regards to these two different types, the crate and the crate free, the group housing, are
Mm.
there certain modifications that has to be done so that you can ensure the biosecurity in that gestation barn is good, or it's pretty much the same?
I would say it's pretty much the same because the large majority of the biosecurity is not done in the barn but out of the barn. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
if we take it back to those steps, the outer parameter, the biggest biosecurity benefit you could do to your farm is actually have no feed truck from the outside, for example. So the key to biosecurity is basically removal of all vehicles in and out and reduction in people in and out. So really, what's happening in the barn is not that much different. It's really what's outside. Then you have your 2 to 3 biosecurity levels. Outside the farm, inside the farm parameter, then inside the building. So you've got to um, be making sure the biosecurity is at a high level. Some people say, "Oh, yeah, but then the sows will walk around and they'll infect each other." But you'd say, "Well, hang on, you're actually when you utilize a stall system, you've got all these sows packed in tightly together. One of them sick, actually, the chance of it passing to its neighbors is very high, isn't it? If you've got something in the barn, you're going to have it in all the barn pretty quickly
Yeah.
anyway."
How do you see the Southeast Asia pig industry adapting to group housing? Do you feel that it will become faster over time, over the next few years?
I will because I do rather because some of the largest producers across Southeast Asia have made a commitment to group housing.
Mm,
So it has to happen. If we look
mhm,
in percentage terms of sows, it will have to happen pretty quickly. And then I guess that will have a flow-on effect because these large producers also utilize contract growers and things like that. So you would presume that because of your supply chain, all has to be compliant. You would presume that they therefore say to investors and contract growers, well, your farm also has to be compliant to group housing. So I think it will start to pick up pace. Do I think, like I said, the 2025 is ambitious. Um, if I look at today, most farms we build are still gestation stalls. It
mhm.
will start to pick up pace, but in percentage term, for it to get to say 25% in Southeast Asia, it will still take a few years. But the change is coming. It 100% is coming, whether it's customer driven or and there's customer and there's customer, like the consumer, should I say, driven by the consumer. Do you make the choice? Yeah. And I think more and more customers, albeit slower in Southeast Asia, so consumers will drive it, but then the global companies, such as all the ones we mentioned earlier, they're the ones that will say, well, as part of for me to operate in America and especially Europe, I have to adhere to pretty strict rules. Therefore, I'm just going to roll those out all the way down my supply chain. And that's where it becomes a force thing, doesn't it? I think it'll be driven by consumers, global companies, and then also the large pig producers because they have these environmental sustainability governance goals, which everybody now it seems to be such a common language now that you didn't hear a short time ago. But now it's like, yeah, this is on us. But then if it's on us, it's all the way down our supply chain.
Thank you so much, Nigel. I learned a lot from
Oh,
you
good.
today.
No problem.
Before we end, there's something additional information that you'd like to share with our listeners about crate free or about group housing?
I think just obviously from a Big Dutchman perspective is that this is something that as a company, we're obviously a European company. We've actually led the way from an animal welfare stroke group housing, free farrowing, with the amount of studies, etc., we've done, and the main thing is we've been utilizing these in production for a long period. So the experience gained from Europe, Australia, etc., is actually real beneficial to when we come to roll these out in Southeast Asia because we already have the experience. We have the experience, we have the knowledge, and as I mentioned earlier, any customer of ours that adopts these principles or equipment of group housing, training is of the utmost importance, and it's something that we really pride ourselves on is the training and after sales. It's change, I guess, isn't it? Change is always is always hard, and
Yeah.
but certainly if you can reassure the customer that look, here you go, and we even arrange occasionally if a customer wants to speak to somebody who's an actual pig producer who's utilizing the equipment, where they'd rather hear it from a farmer than somebody like me because they think I might be a tad biased perhaps. So
Yeah.
which is also fine, and we arrange tours sometimes, but obviously that's a
Mhm,
lot more difficult with ASF these days. But so
mhm.
yeah, the change is inevitable and change will be a little bit hard, but it is coming for sure. And I think it's going to be beneficial for the industry long term because it will be that the demands from the consumers and the companies is coming. How quick it comes, nobody's sure. Yeah.
Well, thanks again so much, Nigel.
No, no, you're welcome.
Indeed, full K3 gestation may still be many years away in Southeast Asia, but the ground has been laid. Thank you for tuning into this podcast. please subscribe to Asian Agribiz podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your preferred podcast platform. For more insights into the Asian animal protein industry, visit www.asian-agribiz.com.